Back here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, coming to you via Facebook Live, Andrew Posadas, Andrew Galata, and it is now my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Mets beat writer for MLB.com. He's also been seen on SNY and the MLB Network, and also the co-author of an upcoming memoir on David Wright entitled The Captain, which comes out October 13th, which you can pre-order now. Anthony DiComo. Anthony, welcome to One.
Happy to be here, virtually at least.
And it's our pleasure. And I want to get things started first on a broad scope with the MLB. As we all know, the coronavirus has taken its toll on the Miami Marlins. Ken Rosenthal reported earlier this morning that another player had tested positive, bringing the total up to 17 players and 2 coaches. Also, ESPN's Jeff Passan reported that the Philadelphia Phillies have canceled workouts today after a coach and a clubhouse attendant tested positive for coronavirus. But Anthony, I just want to get your thoughts on these updates. And should we expect other teams to eventually go through maybe an outbreak, or is this something that you believe Major League Baseball can contain if they are more strict with protocols involving health and safety?
Well, you hope we've already seen the worst of it, but and I wish I could answer your question, but I don't know. The fact is, I don't know. Major League Baseball doesn't know. The teams don't know because I think certainly if you go back to March, none of us could have expected the game, the sport, the world to look the way right now that it does. So we're all kind of just going with this as it comes, and obviously the situation in Miami is not ideal. It's affected the Marlins in a great way. It's affected several other teams in pretty significant ways. All I can tell you is this, Major League Baseball cares about this a lot, cares about doing it the right way, cares about making sure that they are taking every step possible to prevent things like this from happening. It's not foolproof. You can't just create this environment where no one can test positive, but you can test, you can educate, you can do all of these different things. So, certainly I would say the league is hopeful that we've seen the worst of it. I'm hopeful that we've seen the worst of it. I think everyone involved in the game would just love to play out the rest of this season and not, I shouldn't say not have to worry about it, because we're all going to always be worried and concerned as we go forward here, but maybe have it be a little more on the back burner and have the baseball take precedence, because baseball is here and that's a good thing. And I cover the Mets, and they've been playing games without safety issues so far, and it's been great. It's been great to have baseball back. So I think that's the bottom line, is that's what everyone wants.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that real quick, is there anything the Mets are doing specifically different from the Marlins after the Marlins outbreak, like after they learned? Is there any increased safety protocols from before the restart? Is everything really status quo for them?
Yeah, I would say everything's more status quo. They've been doing a good job. They're a veteran team. They've held lots of meetings. They've talked a lot, even before anyone ever got back to New York for spring training 2.0, summer camp, whatever you want to call it. These guys seem to have taken the message to heart, whether that's wearing masks, whether that's sanitizing their hands, often social distancing, obviously. Brody Van Wagenen, the GM, has said, well, 6 feet's not good enough for us. We want to do 10 feet. And look, those are all great things to say. Those are all great things to practice. Obviously, in reality, it doesn't quite work out that way. You see guys high-fiving. You see guys fist-pounding. It's probably unrealistic to think that you're going to get a group of Major League Baseball players together, playing competitive games, not coming closer than 6 feet, not spitting, not doing those things. But by and large, they've been pretty good. And they're taking precautions. They went up to Boston this past week. They took 6 different buses, no more than 10 people on a bus. So no one's more than 6, 7, 8 feet apart through that entire ride. They could have taken a plane, packed everyone in. They didn't do it. So they're doing everything that I would say is realistic to do. They're following Major League Baseball's guidelines. Is there an element of luck that no one, that it hasn't affected them, whereas it's affected the Marlins? Maybe. I don't know what the Marlins were doing off the field. I don't know what the Mets do off the field when they go home. But certainly to a man, they have talked about their responsibilities. And the other part of it is this. They've talked about, we're a competitive team. We want to win the World Series. To do that, we need to stay healthy. We need guys to not be contracting this virus, because if you contract the virus, all of a sudden you're looking at probably 3 weeks down. That's a third of the season, or more than a third of the season. So they're not really willing to do that. And you hope that their actions throughout the rest of the season back up the words. I think so far they've done a pretty good job.
Yeah, and Anthony, when you think about the other professional sports leagues and the fact that the MLS, the NBA, the WNBA went into bubble cities, and obviously when Commissioner Manfred had first brought that up in Arizona, it was quickly dismissed by the players. Do you think there would be a difference at all if we had multiple hub cities with maybe you have the AL and the NL East in New York, in the Central AL, NL, maybe you have them in Kansas City and so forth? Do you think there might have been a difference if there were multiple hub cities? Do you think we'd still see maybe an outbreak on a team, or do you think that would have neutralized it and we'd see 0 cases, as has been the case with the MLS, the NBA, and the WNBA?
Yeah, I don't. It's a hard question for me to answer. Certainly, I'm not a epidemiologist or a disease expert of any kind. There are, I would say, flaws and problems with the bubble system, just like there are flaws and problems with the non-bubble system. And maybe a couple of years down the line, we'll be able to look back and determine definitively which would have worked better for Major League Baseball. But I think at the end of the day, in either system, it comes down to responsibility with the players. And that's not to say that if you do all the right things, you're going to 100% foolproof prevent yourself and your teammates and everyone around you from getting the virus, but it can help a lot. So regardless of whether you're in a bubble in New York City or you're traveling to Boston and Atlanta and Philadelphia and wherever else, you need to be taking those precautions as a player, as a staff member, as a media member, as anyone who's around the team. And I think that's true, regardless of which system you choose. So we'll see. We'll see when the NBA gets going and the NFL gets going ultimately, hopefully this fall, and we'll see how it all turns out. I think a couple of years down the line we'll have a better gauge of what's better. But I do think both systems can work, and I'm hopeful for Major League Baseball that this non-bubble system can work for them.
So obviously this has been such a crazy offseason for the Mets, especially. You had Carlos Beltran first, then he parted ways with the Mets after the Astros cheating scandal and everything with that. Then you bring in Luis Rojas, and he came in obviously with a short offseason getting ready, and then coronavirus pandemic kicks in, and then he has to restart back. So how do you think, being with the team every day, covering the team every day, how do you think he's handling the team in the locker room, on the field decisions, and just stuff like that?
Yeah, well, one of the things when the Mets hired Luis Rojas, it was, if you remember, it was back in February. It was just before spring training. It was pretty quick. They fired Carlos Beltran. They hired Luis Rojas. And the big reason why was because they knew it would be seamless. This was a guy who, despite not having any big league managerial experience, he had been with the team for about a decade. He knew the organization inside and out as well as pretty much anyone. He knew the players. He had managed something like a third of the clubhouse or more before, in the minor leagues before becoming a big league manager. So they weren't necessarily worried about the transition, whereas they might have been if they had hired someone from outside the organization. So I think that kind of held true throughout the quarantine, in that he had these relationships in place. He was still able to communicate effectively with his players, with his coaches. I know his coaching staff, Jeremy Hefner on the pitching side, Chili Davis on the hitting side, those guys were able to communicate individually with the players. So that it's hard to say seamless because nothing is seamless in 2020. But when they got back to New York, 3-4 weeks ago, it was almost, as relatively speaking as you can get, like they had never left, and they were ready to hit the ground running. So certainly a weird time for Luis Rojas. I'm not going to discount that. He had to wait, an extra 4 months to manage his first big league game, but it does seem like, he has handled it professionally. He has handled it well. And, the Mets have probably been a little better off for it.
And Anthony, Luis Rojas, the new manager, trying to infuse a new culture here with the team. But as you mentioned in one of your tweets, it may be a new season, but there's still some old problems from last season still rearing its ugly head. One of them is the Mets offense and their inability to just put up runs consistently when star pitcher Jacob deGrom is on the mound. And as we saw last night, 6 innings, 3 hits, 2 earned runs, a walk, and 4 strikeouts. The Mets were up, ended up giving up that lead after Lugo gave up that home run, and then a few more after a Vasquez hit later on. But I just wanted to give you this stat. Got this from Jacob Resnick. deGrom has received a no decision in 33.5% of his 173 career starts, and he has a 2.61 career ERA, 66-49 career record. Anthony, have you ever seen a pitcher the caliber of deGrom's who's had this problem from his offense not giving him enough help throughout his career like this?
It's, as a beat writer covering the team, and I've covered Jacob deGrom's entire career, you almost throw your hands in the air and say, what do I even ask this guy after the game? Because it is the same story every single time. 2 years ago, he wins the Cy Young. The Mets had a losing record in his starts. Last year, he wins the Cy Young. The Mets had a losing record in his starts. This year, they're 1-1, and he's pitching very well again, maybe as well as we've seen based on some of the things he's done in those two outings. So, yeah, it's almost a tragic flaw for the Mets that they have, debatably, I would say, the best pitcher in baseball, and they have not been able to come even close to maximizing the output of these great starts that he gives them time and time again. And frankly, for them to get to where they want to go, they need to start doing that. They weren't able to do it the past 2 years, as I said, when he delivered Cy Young seasons 2 years ago, and pound for pound, one of the best pitching seasons in the history of baseball. And, they weren't able to make the playoffs. Same thing last year, maybe not quite as good a season, but still a Cy Young season for Jacob deGrom. Weren't able to make the playoffs. If that trend continues throughout this 60-game season, they're not going to make the playoffs, or at least not going to make noise in the playoffs this season. They need to do it. And the answer why they haven't been able to, I don't think anyone really knows. You can point to the fact that Jacob deGrom is often matching up against another team's ace. So that affects the off. But it's the bullpen too struggles in Jacob deGrom's start. I do genuinely believe there's an element of added pressure in these games. The Mets want to do well for him, and maybe you're pressing a little bit, but they need to figure it out because, like I said, they're not going to get to where they want to go if they can't win this guy's starts.
Yeah, and I think just what the Mets have done, even this season, only scoring 5 runs versus the Braves, and then obviously the offense has started to get better with the Red Sox starting to come around, but yesterday just couldn't get the timely hits when they needed to. They did score 5 runs, which isn't a bad output, but what can the Mets do to get guys like Alonso going? I know he had 3 hits yesterday. Cespedes had the home run, but you saw Cespedes strike out in a big situation on Wednesday. Cano lined out after having a multi-hit game, and then Conforto with striking out as well. So what can the Mets do to get their guys going more consistently? And are they doing anything to try to get these guys going? Or are they just going to say, well, time will tell, and hopefully everything evens out by the end of the season?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think they're super worried about the offense because this is probably, in my opinion at least, the best lineup, the best offensive 1 through 9 that they've had since maybe 2006, 2007. It's a good team. It's a bunch of good hitters, and you can worry about guys individually. Does Cespedes have his bat speed in his mid-30s now, coming back from injury, to actually be an impactful player, or is he just going to strike out a bunch and pop a homer every once in a while? We don't know yet. Does Robinson Cano have anything left in the tank, or is this just kind of what he is now? We don't know yet. You can guess, but I think focusing on those things is probably ignoring the fact that Michael Conforto's in the prime of his career, Pete Alonso's in the prime of his career, Jeff McNeil's in the prime of his career, Ahmed Rosario seems to be blossoming and entering the prime of his career right now. J.D. Davis, same thing. So there's enough here that even if some of those other guys don't produce, they should come around as a team. They should be probably, like I said, the best offense that they've had this decade. Maybe not the best in the league or even all that close to it, but they should still be a solid offense. I would worry more about the Mets, about the rotation, certainly about the depth there in the rotation, and some of these bullpen pieces, because that to me is what's going to make or break the season. I do think the offense will come around.
And Anthony, how valuable is it that this season we go from 10 to 16 postseason teams? So everyone talks about how games are so much more crucial. They're worth 2.7 as opposed to if it were a 162 regular game season. So how valuable is it for the Mets that maybe they can work out the kinks in these first 10 games, knowing that as long as they come through strong, there are going to be spots there in the postseason for them to grab a wild card. All they need to do is just get in and make noise. And how valuable is it for the Mets knowing that maybe for these first 10 to 12 games, they can kind of work out the kinks and then make that run knowing that there's 16 teams that are going to make the postseason?
Yeah, it's hugely valuable. I mean, the day before the season, they entered knowing that they had very little margin for error. And then all of a sudden, boom, they just got a lot more margin for error. And for a team like the Mets, that's probably not the best team in its division, but that's talented enough that they were maybe a wild card team, maybe a bubble team, somewhere in that mix. Well, all of a sudden, they have a lot more that can go wrong, and they can still kind of back their way into the playoffs. So I'm not saying that's their goal to back their way in, but yeah, I think, with 8 playoff teams in the National League, you can certainly draw up a much more realistic path that the Mets will make it, that they will make it. If you play this season out 100 times, they're going to make it a lot more often than they would have otherwise. That's the same. That goes, that holds true for any team in the league, from the Dodgers down to the Marlins. But for a team in the Mets, like the Mets, that was pretty much squarely in the National League's middle class, I think it helps them a ton.
Yeah, and definitely with having like a little more margin of error, especially with the starting pitching, as you were saying, like the depth obviously isn't there. You have injuries with Syndergaard and Stroman. So first of all, is there any updates on Stroman coming back, especially would he be back for the playoffs earlier? Like, what are the Mets expecting on that front?
Yeah, he's in a weird spot because he's throwing regular bullpen sessions, 50-plus pitches, but he can't do athletically with his torn left calf what he needs to do to field his position, to cover first base, to do all those things. So the expectation is that once that calf totally heals up, he'll be pretty much good to go because his arm's in shape. He's been throwing without issue. The problem is we don't really know how long it's going to take for that leg to heal. The Mets have called it week to week, which usually they call pretty much everything day to day. So that sets off some alarm bells. I would think when this first happens, a lot of people were worried that he would miss most, if not all, of the season. I don't think that's the case. I do think we'll see him at some point, probably here coming up in August. But whether that's one more start he misses or 4 more starts that he misses, I really can't tell you. I would say it's probably somewhere in that next 2-3 week range.
Yeah, and Anthony, now I kind of want to transition into what I mentioned earlier in my intro. You are going to be the co-author of an upcoming memoir on David Wright entitled The Captain. Comes out October 13th. Can you just talk to us about the process? How did the idea first come about with you and David Wright coming up with this memoir? How did that come about? And just talk to us about the process leading into the book and it being completed.
Sure. Yeah. I've covered David for a long time. I got on the Mets beat in 2010. I was actually an intern as far back as 2007. So I've covered the bulk of his career, and I always had it in the back of my mind that, at some point I would like to write a book about him. I think just a hugely impactful guy for Mets fans. He was a generational player for the franchise, probably the best position player the franchise has ever had, and I think resonates a lot with a lot of fans. So it was always something in the back of my mind. And then watching him go through all the injuries that he did at the end of his career, watching him come back, watching how much the end of his career meant to Mets fans, and in addition to the prime, it just seemed like the obvious time to pursue it. So I got in touch with David toward the end of his final season in 2018. I told him that I was thinking about doing this, and he loved the idea, and we got to talking about it a little more. And in my mind, initially, I thought it was going to be a book about David, not necessarily by David. But the more we got to talking about it, the more he liked the idea of maybe controlling his own story and getting a message out there. And for him, that message was, for young people, the value of hard work, the value of doing things the right way. Maybe that sounds a little trite and cliche to put it in those words, but it very much is what he's about. And it very much is important to him. So the more we talked about it, the more he liked that idea. So we decided to go down that route and make it a memoir. And he has just been awesome to work with. Obviously hours and hours of interviews, not just with him, but with his family, with his friends, with teammates throughout the years, coaches, everyone you can think of. And yeah, we delivered the manuscript in March. It's been in edits ever since. It comes out October 13th, like you said, and I'm pretty excited about it. I think it will give, Mets fans a look at the guy that maybe they haven't had before, and certainly will give them a sense of everything he got through, everything he went through, A, to get to the major league level, and B, become the star that he ultimately did, but then B, during that second act of his career, overcoming the adversity that he did, working as hard as he did, really just for a chance to get on the field one more time to kind of end things a little bit on his terms. I think it sends a powerful message, I think, to especially to Mets fans and to fans of baseball.
And just one more thing about David Wright, and especially we saw with Jose Reyes just retiring yesterday. Really that relationship for that team was just so big. And David Wright, Jose Reyes, the whole left side of the infield. And just it seems like that chemistry was there between them and the rest of that 2006 between like 2010 team. Like that chemistry was great. You saw Delgado there as well, Beltran, so many just great players. Like, does that come through just obviously on the field, but also with David Wright behind the scenes as well, writing books, stuff like that? Is he the same player on and off the field, and same with all the other guys?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you talk about idolizing not just baseball players, but celebrities and whoever else. And, you hear it all the time. Like, you're always disappointed, right? Like, these guys don't turn out to be the human beings or the people that you think they are. David's the exact opposite. David is everything that you would imagine that he is. He's a gentleman. He's obviously a great worker. He was obviously a great baseball player, but the human being aspect, he's just a good dude. And you don't come across that all that often about guys that you can't really say a bad word about. And one of the people that I interviewed for the book was Dave Raccaniello, who might be familiar to some Mets fans, a longtime bullpen catcher, but also one of David's best friends. And he said something that stuck with me, and it was basically the effect of, there are just no skeletons in the closet of this guy. He does everything the right way, almost annoyingly so. But it's true. That is the kind of guy that David is. And, I hope he doesn't see this because he'll give me crap for just waxing poetic about him. But no, he's a good dude, a great guy to work with. And, that's one of the reasons why I was glad to do the project, because it was rewarding to work with someone like that.
Mets beat writer for MLB.com. You can catch him on SNY and the MLB Network. And as we just mentioned, the co-author of an upcoming memoir on David Wright comes out October 13th, entitled The Captain. You can pre-order it now. Anthony DiComo. Anthony, pleasure to have you here on One-on-One. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was fun.